So thank you, Ed, and to our panelists. I'm going to say something a little bit about the PSAC, and it goes back to what Dick mentioned at the first panel, which is everything we did was thought out, or at least we thought it did. We didn't think of everything. That which we did think of, we thought out. One of those things was the PSAC. We were asked what would be the ideal governing board for FirstNet. They were going to do what they were going to do anyway, but they wanted our feedback, our input. And we knew it had to have a serious public safety component to it, but we also needed people who had financial experience, people who had wireless experience. All of those things had to be on the board. We didn't know what the total composition was going to look like, but what we did insist upon was a group, the PSAC, that had the technical expertise to advise the board. And we've had some incredible chairs to start with. Certainly Harlin, you know, everybody knows Harlin as the quintessential person to lead that first effort. But Todd, your efforts in moving that forward before your retirement, we thank you. And for Chris, you know, it's on your shoulders, buddy. That's all I got to tell you. Don't screw it up. I know you're a firefighter, but we can get through that. Don't worry about it. No, it's one of those things you can't have, unless you've got the expertise behind you, it's not going to be successful. So speaking of success, and I don't know if we lost Harlan, because our next panel is really about FirstNet Progress Report. And a couple folks you've already seen and met, but we're a little bit early. But I would like to actually call Jeff Johnson up to help lead this panel, but also Harlin McEwen and Kevin McGinnis. So you've already met JJ, you know him, and for those who have not met Kevin McGinnis, Kevin was a state EMS chief up in Maine, and was one of these people that came on to our effort a couple months in at the strong suggestion of Harlin McEwen. I was trying to keep the group small. Everybody kept wanting to have more people in it, but Kevin turned out to be one of the most thoughtful people to help us lead our effort in trying to get this thing launched. EMS sometimes gets lost under the rubric of, oh, they're just fire. Well, they're not. The state EMS folks around the country have a different viewpoint. It's really important. If you think about the capabilities we have with the broadband network, a dedicated network, the telemedicine that's out there, if you think about what happened during the pandemic, a lot of those thoughts came out of the EMS community, and that was Kevin. It was also Paul Patrick, and I appreciate Paul for his efforts from the beginning as well. Those two key spokespeople for the viewpoint of EMS. I was going to try and stall for Harlan, but if anybody sees Harlan, we can... Hey, he's an elder. He can do that. This is totally understandable. We can actually get started. We have just a minute or so. But again, the moment we... Say again? Roger that. Okay, so this gives me an opportunity to give a microphone to somebody, just because we got a little bit of time here. Where is Jeff? Where's Jeff Bratcher? Where are you? Are you here? I'm going to give you a microphone, which is dangerous, of course. There you go. So my question, again, we don't talk much about PSCR lately, but while we're waiting for Harlan, I'd get to see your thoughts on when we first came to you and we came to Derek to say what we were going to be doing here. What do you guys think? And first of all, thank you for all the efforts that you put in your move over to FirstNet. We're grateful for that. So,
great. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
My chief counsel grabbed my arm as I walked up. He's like, be careful. I'll be fine, Paul. No, the early efforts, I think JJ, Kevin mentioned it earlier, seeing everyone here that's been involved with FirstNet, even before FirstNet existed. The work we did at Public Safety Communications Research was really focused on the initial allocation of spectrum. We had a demo network, if you recall, on how public safety can actually use broadband technology. And there was actually quite a debate between WiMAX, long-term evolution. And public safety decided we want to go with the long-term evolution technology approach. We started a demonstration network, started working with the waiver recipients. Todd Early, where are you at? Remember the waivers? Working on the early broadband projects. So that was a lot of tremendous growth, and it was our honor to support public safety in developing what their needs and translating those into what we could build and put into a network, especially as we moved forward with the FirstNet Authority and releasing the RFP. I always give my kudos to Harlin McEwen. One of the first instances I had as a federal employee was with some other senior engineers that were working on public safety communications. And I'll never forget Harlan standing up, and he's a very shy man. And he said, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You can't do that." So that was my introduction to Harlan and some of his thinking and going back to that. But Chris, thank you. Hopefully, vamped for you well there, and turn it back.
Did a great job. Thank you very much for spelling Harlan there for a bit. I will say this, for those who don't know the PSR work, that's why we wanted people to hear that. Hopefully they will continue to support FirstNet and all issues public safety. We wouldn't be where we are without them, and they're one of those unsung hero groups that we keep talking about. Now, speaking of some sung and unsung heroes, we talked a little bit about the first principles of FirstNet. When we were saying what was most important to public safety, that was key. And now the panel we're going to have today is talk about FirstNet's progress and how important those first principles are to make sure we stay true to those first principles. And I can think of no better panel than the three gentlemen up here to talk about that. So, JJ, you want to kick it off?
Kevin.
Well, Kevin, okay, let's go ahead and kick it off.
Gladly. Thank you all for being here today. What a day. 10 years really flies. It's amazing. EMS is back about 15 years, which is as long as I've been thinking about how EMS might do better with a dedicated network. I've always believed that if we had a nationwide public safety broadband network, that EMS would eventually become its most frequent user. And with all of the things that we could do in EMS, if we only had the ability to communicate, not just voice, but patient data, video, CAT scans, MRIs, and other things from the field to the hospital, to put people in the field in touch with the people that can help speed the care, or just to notify people about the patient that they're going to get and that they need to be prepared for. And I want to give you a couple of examples of those. But I think a couple of things that have really accelerated that, or us moving towards that end of becoming more frequent users of the broadband network. One certainly was COVID. We've always appreciated, it's been mentioned here several times today, that the power of priority and preemption is one of the major features of FirstNet. And we've seen that in EMS from the onset of testing centers and sites and vaccination centers and sites, when suddenly, out of sort of nowhere, we were organizing to do these activities in tents and other places, in parking lots, and suddenly drawing 300 or 400 cars sitting there endlessly for hours at a time. And what do people do for hours at a time in their car? They download Netflix, and they watch movies, and they do other creative, constructive things. And even the folks that are sitting in tents waiting for testing. And so suddenly you have doctors and nurses and EMTs and paramedics and others who are trying to man those tents, who suddenly can't communicate from one part of the site to another part of the site. And you start using those people as runners, because that's what you devolve to, is the oldest form of communication is face-to-face. Well, that's when we started to realize that we needed our own network, because it just wasn't working. And we've seen the spread and the support of FirstNet at all of these sites over the last couple of years, and it's really had an impact on us. Another thing was our ability to simply respond to a 911 call. Now, you may not know it, but every call we go on is not a life-threatening call. In fact, only about 10% at best are. 30% at best really need our attention. 30 or 40% really need us to do something immediately to make the patient's life better. But what do you do on all those other calls? On every call, traditionally, we handle them the same way. A crew of 2 or 3 or however many goes into the home, sees the patient, decides what needs to get done, and does it. Well, if you're starting to do that in a COVID situation, and every time you go into a home and come out, you've got to re-glove and re-gown and re-everything, that gets time-consuming, and it becomes a tremendous waste and a drag on the system. So we learned that in certain cases, not the 10% or even maybe up to the 30%, but in a lot of cases, we could respond to the scene and communicate with people inside using devices. We could actually do a physical exam, having them use their device, and we're watching on our device, and make some decisions about how many people are actually going to go in and touch the patient and be exposed to the patient. So those are some uses that COVID certainly drove for us. Another one is the fact that patients were being evacuated from hospitals, and patients that didn't really need to be in hospital were starting to be treated at home. And Medicare was allowing folks to do at-home care as though they were in the hospital, but being treated by other clinicians who would go to the home. And that actually became something that was handed down to EMS. At the Mayo Clinic, which you may have heard of, the Mayo Clinic EMS unit actually became the mechanism for doing at-home care. They became the doctors and nurses, but paramedics who used telehealth extensively to take care of patients at home, so they didn't have to be in the hospital, either being exposed or otherwise devolving in their conditions. We have an EMS service in the middle of Pennsylvania at a major medical center who is starting to use telehealth in major ways. They've equipped 17 ambulances with full telehealth platforms. And in order to do that, the rationale for them is sort of the second kick in the pants that we've had, which has been a very good thing. Medicare, which traditionally has only paid ambulance services, that is reimbursed for patient care, if you transport the patient to the hospital. Now, you remember the 10% and 30% of the cases? That means that some 50% or more of the cases are being transported to the most expensive place to treat a patient for a condition in the most expensive conveyance possible for something they didn't need in the first place. And so something had to turn on its head. Medicare realized that and started a program called ET3. I won't explain the acronym, but it allows ambulance services to go out, treat the patient in place, and leave them behind with the care that they needed and only the care that they needed. However, in order to do that for most of these patients, you had to use telehealth and be in touch with a physician or a PA or somebody at a center. And those 17 ambulances in upstate Pennsylvania, that's why they're equipped today with telehealth platforms. And they're using electronic stethoscopes and otoscopes and other things so the doctor on the other end can actually hear and see what's going on with that patient. That's being replicated all over the country. On the emergency end of things, patient with a heart attack now has the opportunity to be treated very quickly and definitively. If you get them to the hospital in time, the hospital's ready to treat them. And one thing that's being used now is a multi-vital signs telehealth transmission system so that everybody on the cardiac catheterization team in the hospital, in the ER, can all see the patient, get all of the vitals, look at the electrocardiogram and other things well in advance of the patient's arrival. That speeds what we call the door-to-balloon time, the time it takes to put a stent in, to open the artery up, put a stent in, to as little as 10 or 15 minutes, which is really remarkable. So those are just some examples of how EMS today is using it, and we will become the most frequent users of FirstNet.
That's awesome. I'm always fascinated to listen to Kevin. I always learn something. And I love the term telehealth because that's an old fire station joke. You know, the three fastest forms of communication over time: telegraph, telephone, telefirefighter. Rumors spread quick in fire stations, I think it's fair to say. I also think it's, you know, you touch on some important things that relates to EMS. When I think about fire, it's so integrated with EMS as was mentioned. You know, fire is a rapid self-sustaining oxidation process, usually accompanied by the evolution of heat and light in various intensities. Burns up and out. It's not all that complicated. You put water on it, it gets smaller. Take away its air, it gets smaller. Chemically interrupt it, gets smaller. It's the systems around what we do that makes what this entire emergency response system complicated. It isn't the application of water to a fire. It is. EMS is far more complicated on the system. It's the integrated part of the system, not only with EMS, but with law, with public health, and especially on the houselessness issues. If you don't believe yet that public health is a big component and senior services are a big component of emergency response, you're missing it. We've seen statistics to date that houselessness is now comprising about a third of 911 responses by paramedics and fire departments. They're meaningful issues and they're system issues. As we talk about where we're going, I think the Holy Grail is the Z-axis. It is knowing not only left to right, but where you are vertically. Not only does it help me find firefighters when they call Mayday, but it helps us find the person calling 911. We can get more accurately where you are, makes a meaningful difference. And not only that, but the X, Y, and Z on wildland is now a requirement under federal law. For the first time, we will know by device where our wildland firefighters are as they are deployed out across the landscape. And someone said earlier, well, you can't predict emergencies. Well, listen, I'm going to be the first guy ever to do that. We will have wildfires in California, won't we, Chief Z? Starting about May. And I'll predict that right now. There is some things you can predict and you can trend. And frankly, having a network that creates connectivity, that creates a data set, that data set that informs algorithms, the AI and ML that helps us think about our business before it happens, only makes us better and only makes us more efficient. We'll see more apps. We will see more mobile access. Coverage, we're not done with coverage. We're not done with coverage at FirstNet. As Walt Disney said, I will never be done improving. And that's us at FirstNet. We will not be done. We have more coverage to do in the West, more mobile assets to deploy. We have come a massive distance, but we have more to do. And what this inspires is it inspires creativity and the flow of capital into this space. I didn't practice this, so I'm probably going to get myself in trouble. Jorge and Philip are here today from Infra Capital, and they announced last month that their company is making massive investments into the public safety tower space. And just think of it like this. They are betting their company that there is going to be a weaving together of the land mobile radio tower network and the LTE radio network. And why not? Public safety has towers today where the commercial providers need to come, where FirstNet needs to go. And if you didn't have FirstNet and you don't have a vision and a goal, then you never inspire investment that causes it to happen. Because we just watched this happen in Mono County, California. Chief Frank Freevault, the fire chief down there, they went through their tower inventory of land mobile radio towers. They went through that tower inventory. They partnered with FirstNet, and by the time they were done, FirstNet had far better coverage. The land mobile radio network had far better coverage. The people calling 911 had better coverage. Sheriff Leo Dutton in Lewis and Clark County, Montana told me one time, hold it, let me get this right. You can improve my coverage. The people that vote me into office get better service. And that's just what FirstNet is. I said, that's right, Sheriff. And he goes, who wouldn't do that? It's exactly the right perspective. We will continue to see these systems come together and start to leverage off one another, and we'll continue to see innovation. And I think the final step in all this is the common operating picture. Take a look at Chief Brian Fennessy and what he's doing in Orange County, California. We're running a program down there, Chief Z, FIRUS. FIRUS puts a plane with thermal imaging capability in the air on the first activation for a wildfire. That streams to the San Diego University supercomputer. It's the wildfire supercomputer. It, in real time, produces a predictive map, lacing together current weather flow, predicted weather flow, topography, fuels, the whole thing. And as the incident commander, you get that back as this amoeba of where that fire is going. It can tell you where that fire will be in all probability, in 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or an hour. Now let's think of the next step. I need to be able to take that piece of information and send it over to the police department that's doing the evacuation. And I need to know which ones have been cleared and which one aren't, because it affects how we deploy our resources. And you can take that case history and just blow it on out and see that what we don't have yet, but we are working on it, is a common operating picture where it all comes together, it all laces together, it's all shareable, and it's individual, out and return. Share it in a manner that helps incident commanders be better informed. Believe it or not, we still have fire commanders pulling up in their Suburban and throwing a map on the hood of the Suburban, and that's the best tech they have. We continue to improve coverage, and that will feed everything else. And I just want to thank FirstNet, Jason Porter, Jim Bugel, Stacy, the entire team. What you guys have done for public safety will never be recognized completely and effectively. But I just want to thank you today. Harlan?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. First of all, as the program has progressed today, it's very hard to say anything new. The people like Jeff and Kevin and the other speakers before me have told you time and time again kind of how we got here, where we are, and kind of where we're going. I look around the room. I can look at everybody's eyes in this room with maybe one or two exceptions, and I know all of you personally. And every one of you have been critical to the success of why we're here today. In other words, it isn't any one person. Jeff has said it many times, it's a team. And the people in this room, you're here because you were a part of this, and you continue to be a part of it. And to me, that's what it's all about. When the FCC chairwoman talked about the past, the present, and her vision of the future, that's what this program was all about. You know, I, probably being the oldest person in the room, started in this progression really in 1995. But I had no idea. I mean, FirstNet wasn't a buzzword. We weren't talking about broadband wireless. We were talking about voice and data. It was a different world in those days. But everything that was done, and many of you were involved in those steps, we started with needing more spectrum in 1995. Half of the FirstNet spectrum was the result of the PSAC group who said public safety needs more spectrum. We weren't thinking broadband at the time, we were thinking data. We didn't have any spectrum to be able to transmit or share data. And, you know, all of these things, you put them piece by piece, year by year, to where we have gotten today and where we will be in the future. And it's a very important story. You know, some of you in the room are newer at this than others. You may have only been in part of it in the middle or the end of it. But every step of that is why we're here today. I built up some numbers. They're probably old numbers, but it's important to remember. So in the public safety community, these are, again, maybe a little out of date, but there are over 28,000 fire agencies in this country. There are over 6,000 EMS agencies and over 15,000 law enforcement agencies. Now you translate that into personnel. There are over 1 million plus fire people, you tell me.
Yep.
Over 800,000 EMS people and over 700,000 law enforcement people. So think about it in agencies and thinking about, and those numbers may be a little out of date, but they're pretty close. And today, I think publicly, FirstNet, AT&T announced that there are more public safety connections in FirstNet than in any other network in this country. That's a remarkable achievement in a very short period of time. I mean, just think about it. And not only myself personally, but everybody in this room should be so proud of what each of you have done to get us there. Again, there's not much more I can say. You're going to still have some good speakers, but a couple of things. I'm still just excited as hell about this whole project. You'd think probably I would get tired of it, but I'm not. In my personal vehicle, I have an air gain Sierra Wireless router with an air gain antenna and an HPUE device, you know, that can go around in my area. People call me all the time and they want to know where they have coverage. And I can map it on a map, and I can show people where FirstNet works and where Verizon or T-Mobile works. And I can tell you, in the last 2 years, the change is remarkable. I mean, the coverage has steadily grown to the point where FirstNet, in my view, for where I go, has clearly surpassed any of the other commercial carriers. And I can prove it. I mean, it's not like I'm just a good attaboy guy. I can prove it. And, you know, I was talking to some people earlier today that are new at this business that have never heard about HPUE, high-powered user equipment. You know, I was there when we convinced, before we even thought about FirstNet really, that we needed higher power equipment in the cellular world than was allowed for the common user. And that is now translated into a unique opportunity for only those in FirstNet to use that capability. I mean, I just love to talk about it, you know. It's just a fun thing, and the more people I talk to, the more I find don't know about a lot of this. So every one of you has to be in that same mode. You know these things that I'm telling you, and you've experienced them, and you have to share it. And why is FirstNet growing? It's because of all of you. It's because we're telling a story that's truth, and it really resonates. You know, not every person in this country is going to buy a Ford, and not everybody in this country is going to be a FirstNet user. But I really don't care, because those people that aren't smart enough to use it, that's just too bad. The way I look at it is, this is an opportunity that you shouldn't let go by. So, you know, that's kind of my feeling. The future is just unimaginable. You know, in 1995, I never would have dreamed. I mean, I remember we moved from narrowband voice to data, and then we identified the fact that we wanted to use some of that spectrum for data. And in those days, we were talking about wideband spectrum. We weren't even thinking broadband spectrum. It was not really in our mind. We were thinking, you know, hardwired broadband. And then eventually that moved into the broadband. All of these magical things, I can't possibly predict the future, but I can tell you that FirstNet is the answer as we go forward, because we have, like Jason said, we have 150, 200 applications right now in the catalog, and we've got all these devices. I mean, I remember when we started, somebody said something about Sonam. So I had one of the first Sonam phones because there weren't, I had an iPhone and there was no band 14 in iPhones. So you had to use a Sonam if you wanted to really use it at the beginning. But it wasn't long before we finally convinced, or somebody did, Apple to put band 14 in. And I'm an Apple guy, to be very honest. I don't know how to use Android. But the fact is that all of those things that have happened, I couldn't have predicted. All I can do is say that Chris Moore, Jeff Johnson, Kevin, everybody in this room was positively thinking about where we wanted to go without knowing every possible avenue that we were going to see. And that's what made this possible. So I'm really pleased, and that's really all I have to say.
Let me just turn this thing on again. There we go. Something that Harlan mentioned, and JJ, and the numbers and uptake, what makes this really even more incredible is that there is no requirement. We were very clear in the legislation. We did not want FirstNet to be mandated because we knew there was going to be coverage differences in different places with different carriers, and we never wanted to put public safety in position to take an inferior level of service at all. So the fact, as demonstrated by the numbers Jeff cited, that the network has grown with no requirement to buy it. It's just purely based on the need of public safety and the understanding that it is a better network, and it's there for us that has let it grow. That's one thing. And the second thing Harlan talks about, first of all, can't say enough good things about Harlan. Harlan has his own mind. He will, if you can, has been demonstrated, and is not afraid to share it over time. And there were times when we all had some differences. But I will say this, out of respect for everybody, we kept our differences to ourselves. I mean, we spoke amongst ourselves, but we didn't need to go out and say anything, and we took care of it. And we think that was another really important part of the public safety entity staying together is we're going to disagree because we have different needs. But at the end of the day, we walked out united, and nobody could tell us apart. We all were, there was no daylight between any of us.
But they make good stories if you can ever get us to tell them.
Yeah. Well, I think Andy is writing a book, I think I'm told.
He is.
And someday some of those stories will be told. I guarantee you not all of them will be told, but they were all entertaining nonetheless. Kevin.
One story I think that is worth at least a note. I'm proud to be in a large group of friends of Harlin McEwen. In fact, I mean, it's been almost 20 years ago that he encouraged me to get interested in public safety communications and become a conduit, a voice from EMS in that. And I've enjoyed every minute of it. But I've got something that nobody else in the room can have in terms of the longevity of my relationship. Harlan, as many of you know, lives in Ithaca, New York. I grew up in Ithaca, New York. Went to high school in Ithaca, New York. And one evening, a nice warm evening, my girlfriend and I were in a car overlooking Cuba Lake, a nice setting, no doubt having an intellectual conversation of some sort, when there came a rapping on the side glass. And I rolled down, and it was a cop, because it was after hours, the park is closed. Officer Harlin McEwen kicked me out of the park. Now, that's not the most important part of the story. The most important part of the story is he gave me some recommendations for some places outside his jurisdiction where we could go.
That's a true story.
I don't know how to go around. That was good. You were doing intellectual research on astronomy or something like that, right? And Harlan was helping you further your career. Now, that story alone is not by itself. I mean, it's not. There are plenty of other people in the room that will tell you a similar story. Maybe not quite as good as that one, but a lot of folks that came into this profession, or at least into this specialty within the professions, came as a result of Harlan. And you'll hear about it in one of our future panels here. You've already heard a little bit. Hey, I was introduced to this by Harlan McEwen. Harlan asked and suggested that I do this. Not everybody, but a whole lot of people, and that's a testament to your, 42 plus years as chair or whatever it was of the ICP, Communications and Technology Committee, in addition to all the other things. But again, at the beginning, when there was a group of us that came together, Harlan has always been the guy. And here we had a couple of folks coming up saying something that was, maybe the same, but he embraced everybody and said, look, I'm willing to listen. I think we should do this. Let's do it together. And were it not for that willingness, I don't think we'd be here. So Harlan, again, thank you.
Chris, just one thought. You heard Chairwoman Rosenworcel today essentially give us a path to next-gen 911.
Yep.
That in and of itself is beyond remarkable for the chairwoman to chart a path that is very doable. But it's going to require that we pull together to do that. And there is a lesson to be taken, hooked in the anchor of sometimes we didn't agree, sometimes we didn't get along, sometimes we were very, very candid with one another. But we always kept the goal in mind and moderated our behavior to that end. Always.
Yeah.
First time I met Morgan O'Brien. I was a fire chief. Morgan was running Nextel. We had some interference issues. He brought a team to Oregon. I don't think Morgan would describe that encounter as pleasant. I don't think I would describe it as pleasant either. But it ended up being very pleasant. We created a solution for public safety because we stayed engaged, we stayed positive, we've stayed focused on the goal, and we never contaminated our personal interactions to the point where we couldn't do business. We could always talk. And it turned out phenomenally. And as we get ready to take this next step, let's keep that in mind. We've been watching for a long time public discourse devolve into really unpleasant, irrecoverable kind of discussions. It's not going to get public safety where we need to go. We need to agree and disagree in private. We need to stay focused on the prize, and we need to get the job done. It worked once, it'll work again.
Thanks, JJ. We're coming to the end of our panel here, but Harlan, I know you have something to say, and
I
then
just
maybe
wanted
Kevin.
to close with a couple of things. First of all, there are three very important groups of people that have achieved the success that we're seeing today. First of all, the public safety community. You just talked about that. If we hadn't been able to unify, we couldn't have been here today. The second is, after the legislation was passed, the FirstNet Authority. Ed Parkinson has been a speaker here today, and Ed was on the Hill, you know, and eventually became our leader at the FirstNet Authority. And without their leadership, we wouldn't be here today. And third is AT&T. You know, I have to tell you, I was always a customer of one of their competitors. And when this started to evolve, you know, I started to see the value gradually growing. Coverage is the big thing. Coverage, if you don't have coverage, you have nothing. And the one thing I will tell you is that AT&T gets that. They understand that. They have spent billions of dollars developing the extended coverage that we enjoy today that make this such a success. And Jason, you and all the people there in the room from AT&T, you've been wonderful. I mean, we couldn't have had a better partner than AT&T. So all three of those things are part of the success. And I want to thank you very much, each of you.
Kevin, any last words?
It ain't over. We got lots of work ahead of us.
Amen.
Amen. All right, thank you. Let's say congratulations to our panel. Thank you for your...